never think that the perfect position is just coming at you. And I really hope that you have gotten the feeling that it was like that for me, because of course you're always talking about the nice things, but it's always like, just talk to the people you're interested in. And if you would be the CEO of a certain company, or you're the sporting director of an association or club, like, how should they know you're there? How should you know that you're interested, that you would be willing to give everything you have?
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Working in Sport podcast. My name is James Grigson, and today I'm joined by Kathrin Neuhofer, the sports scientist from the German Ski Association. Kathrin, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, so we've got a lot to go through, but the first thing I can see that jumps off the page is last year, I believe you finished your PhD. Is that right?
No, no,
okay.
No, I wish I would have done that. But so I transitioned to the German Skiing Federation last year, full time, and then I had to postpone a little bit my my PhD, which is about innovation management in football, because I worked in the area of football before that. So it's still taking some time, but I really hope it will be finished this year.
Oh, fantastic!
So keep your fingers crossed for me.
Still, I've got my fingers and toes crossed. But what really jumped out to me was the specific topic. So, developing criteria for an optimized talent scouting, selection, and development process. Talk me through that a little bit more. It sounds like a very data-rich, data-involved process. Talk me a little bit more about what you're aiming to achieve from the PhD.
Yeah, it's definitely data-based. I have the chance to work with a really exciting club, which is working. Who is playing in the Champions League in Austria. And what we've done is meta-analysis, and we collect data, which is of course, on the one hand, it's performance-related data like sprints and some different runs, but it's also connected to different tactical parts. So we could say, for example, in a different tactical movement, what kind of performance a player has to conduct. And stepping that down for different youth teams, the main question is, what does an youth athlete has to do to be able to, step up to the first team one day? I like minimal criteria, because of course we all know there are some excellence criteria, something what makes you special, and that is really hard to tell. I know everybody in the sport field would love to be able to be like, hey, this is a talent, and in 10 years he will be like a pro player. But as we all know, it's not that easy. But having like minimal criteria in football is really important, because in other sports we have that. For example, in gymnastics, you have to have a certain type of flexibility, for example, or a certain height when you want to play basketball in the NBA, for example. But in football, you can be like a really tall player, really small player. For example, like Messi, he's not really tall. And it was important to be like, hey, what do you have to do on the pitch to later on be able to get to the first team? That is the question about that. Okay,
and I'm guessing there would be some age dependencies in that. Like, are you attempting to line up those physical and maybe technical criteria with age or playing age or training age? Am I right in assuming?
Yeah. And you have, of course, different playing positions. I'm not really familiar with Australian football, but it's kind of a little bit getting in the same area. You have different playing positions, and of course, you have different demands somebody has to commit. And this is just breaking down what would you have to do, for example, at the age of 14. Minimal criteria to later on get to the first team.
Okay. And the role that you're in now, you're a sports scientist at the German Ski Association. And taking a look back at some of the roles that you had done, I'd seen sort of, you did some time over the United States, but largely inside of Germany. And it's been a mixture between football clubs and football in particular as a sport, but also some time as a research assistant. You've done some lecturing as well, sort of more in that academic field. I want to ask you about the move back into sort of a more quote unquote practical role, or more hands-on role with athletes and in that sort of environment, how you've taken to that. So sort of, I know you work with the International Football Institute, which was, you know, the role that you had previously was relatively hands-on, but comparatively to some of your work with inside of universities and lecturing and things like that, this is sort of a transition back into the practical world of things. How have you found that transition back to that sort of space?
Yeah. So the main reason studying sports science was to be in sports. That was my my aim when I started that 11 years ago, I think. And that was always my passion, and in passion, not just sports, but it's professional sports. And as you were explaining, I started a lot with some research and science, and that was really exciting. Even my last job at the International Football Institute, it still was, in the kind of third row. I was never really influencing something in the practical part. I was not like talking to players. I was always talking to coaches or managers, and I felt like there's a lot of things going lost in this communication, and I really wanted to influence something with the athletes and the coaches. And right now, so what I'm doing is I'm building up an athlete monitoring system, which is called SmarterBase. Probably you guys know that in Australia. And what I really love doing that is I talk with every different player in this system. So I work with athletes, I work with coaches, I work with head coaches, managers, but I also work, for example, with the ski technicians. And this is something what I really like, having different players and having the feeling that I can influence something that makes hopefully the skiers out there healthier, or that they stay healthy and more successful. So that was kind of the transition getting back. But I would not deny that maybe, one day I will go back a step and teach again more. But I felt I really want to influence something out there in the high performance world.
And you mentioned now that you're dealing a lot more with athletes, whereas previously you wouldn't have. What is some of the more challenging things that you've had to find now work, or maybe not challenging, let's say different, in communicating with athletes and being that first line response compared to some of the roles that you've had previously?
Yeah. Well, what everybody's different. And yeah. I would not totally say, like athletes are different than coaches, for example. And I really like working with so many different people. And I think that is one of the best benefits I had from the past, that I worked with so many different clubs, associations. You used to work with different people. And but I think what is really crucial working with athletes, you can, if you're not conscious about who you have and what kind of state a person is, you could really influence them in a bad manner. Because if you have a coach and you're hard on a coach, he's having a bad time and you're harder on him. Maybe, he's not doing his job in the best way, but he's not directly influencing the performance of the player on the pitch. So if I'm, for example, talking to an athlete and he has had the past 3 competitions were really bad, and if I'm not conscious about in what kind of state the athlete is, and I'm, like sometimes you're throwing like hard words on somebody and you don't really mean it, and maybe it's a joke, but it could really it could really influence him and be getting like this low more down and being more like depressed and really sad, and getting his self-confidence down. And that this is like a connection you have to really be conscious about when you work with athletes. Of course, it's different when you're in off season and when you're during the competitions, because right now we're really close to the Olympic Games. And if you have somebody who is like really worrying and is not self-confident, and then you'll be like, hey, that was like really shitty competitions, this could be like really hard on him. So this is maybe one thing you have to be more conscious about. But of course, you should be always conscious about who you have and what kind of state of mind. But for athletes, it's really important.
And for you, what are some of the markers that you look for? Is it, you know, given your background with relatively data-rich environments, or being in relatively data-rich environments, for you, is it more of an interpersonal skill thing, something a little bit more subjective and less tangible that you're looking for, sort of, you know, how your perception of them? Or are you, you know, you've got something in form of a database or something a little bit more objective that you're using to understand where that player is at mentally, that will influence how you're speaking to them?
Yeah. So as you were explaining, in the past years, I worked a lot with data, but before that, I was working mentally with athletes. Okay. So, and I know a lot of people think that is like a controversial, but I really think when you work with data in sports, you still have to really understand what you do with it. So I think that the combination of working psychological with athletes, mental training, and then combining that with data, I think this is something which should be a combination and not a controversy. So I think a lot of times, especially in sports, of course, we focus on data, and data is really important because it tells us if somebody wins or loses. But it doesn't make an impact if you don't understand how you could, for example, transfer information with data. And how you know how, like, what amount of data and what manner you should tell somebody the data. So I think just the data alone is worthless. So, and that the combination really helped me, because, you know, at the end, if you have data and it said like you're doing something wrong and the person doesn't understand it, or is not in the right, doesn't have the right feelings to be able to open to get the data, it doesn't help you anything. And even having with athlete monitoring systems, if you don't have the trust of the athletes to be open and to work with the system, then you just have wrong data. And what should you do with the wrong data? So I think it's always about the human. And the data is always something really helpful. And I'm a big fan of that, of course. But first things first is the human. And we don't only have the athletes, you know, you always have to think about they have family, they have a wife or husband, and some of them have kids, and you know, maybe somebody died in the family, and it's always the whole picture. And if I would, you know, have an advice to how to approach an athlete, is always to listen. That sounds like really, really easy advice, but I realized that a lot of people don't really listen and have the feeling to throw a sentence at somebody. And if you're like, hey, do you want to talk? How is it? And then, you know, like the person tells you everything. And if the person tells you like, oh, I don't want to talk, then you should not talk to them. It's sometimes that easy, but maybe listening and you know, taking a look at the athletes, because you see that with the posture, you see like, hey, he's making himself small, like you should not throw any sentence in. So that was a big loop.
I would say that's no. That was really fascinating to listen to, because people from people that might have had roles inside of universities and a sort of a journey like yourself that has, you know, arguably, if we're looking at a side, I'd classify you as probably more of an academic, given some of the roles that you have had, and obviously your work in your PhD. Typically, people that come from that background with a lot of work in academia and a lot of work with data don't necessarily have as much, or don't place as much emphasis on the soft skills as you just did. So I think the combination of both those skills or philosophies or thoughts is very interesting, and not necessarily something that you would often see from someone with an academic background like yourself. When you were starting out early on, what were some of your thoughts on the industry? You know, like a lot of people, you know, you'd mentioned that you started about 11 years ago. It was still relatively emerging. You know, if you look at where the industry is now, it's really on a boom. But 11 years ago, it wasn't, maybe the path wasn't as clear as what it might be now for you to be able to end up working with professional sports. What were some of your thoughts that you had early on, and did you have any mentors to help you guide through that pathway?
Yeah. So, taking a look at my position right now, it really makes sense to be like, hey, you grew up in the mountain. Of course, you had some different steps, and you ended up in the German Skiing Federation. So that really makes sense. But the path there was, I would have never thought I would end up in this position I have now, because every position and everything what I've done in the past, and it's always nice to have on a resume what you did, what brought you to the position you have. But of course, and it's probably the same for everybody, you've done some different things which are not on your resume, but in looking back, it really helped you. I kind of got by incident into research, because I just had to earn money. I was there in a different city, and the first time in a big city. Cologne is probably not as exciting for you guys as it was for me, because growing up in a real little small city, getting to a big another city. And, I just had to earn money. And I got the advice of my sister, which I really appreciate, is that, you have to earn money, but try to earn the money which could help you in the future. So, because of course, the one thing what I did after high school for 3 months was bartending, which is, you get a lot of money with that, especially if you're nice to people. It's easy to get the money. And I had some colleagues there as well, studying sport, who did that, and it was really easy to get money. But I was trying to get a job would help me in the field, and the nice thing about sports science is, it's like such a broad field. You could do nearly everything which could help you in the future. And it was nice that the Psychological Institute at my university was looking for a research assistant. And I just took the advantage, and I just really tried to get into there because, as I said before, psychology was kind of my first step into sports science, because I was an athlete before I studied, and I really had mental issues because I was a pole vaulter, and of course the poles sometimes break, and then you have some issues. I don't want to dig too deep into that, but that was my first step. Yeah. And I was just there like, okay, it's interesting. I want to understand that, and I'm motivated. And that was my first step. And I had a professor there, and I was just open. I just wanted to learn something, and I'm really grateful because he taught me a lot about science, and something about science you don't necessarily learn in class. It's more about, hey, what is real science? Why are we doing that? And that was the first step to be like, hey, we really have to make an impact. You probably don't know the story. It's about a German goalkeeper, and he committed suicide. And that was the first step that the topic about mental health, depression, burnout was in professional sports in Germany. And in the Psychological Institute, we worked around this issue and really wanted to make an impact and be like, hey, this is a really, really sad case, but there are other athletes struggling with mental health as well. And I felt like, how could you have scientific knowledge and bring it out to people that they realize, hey, we have to do something in this field? And that was for me the first step to, into research. And he was really patient with me, and helping me statistics, and that was really great. The first step into science, and I realized, hey, it's not that bad, because when you start studying, you think everything is exciting except for mathematics, statistics, which is the worst thing at first, and scientific writing. And I realized, no, it's the opposite. It really helps out there, and it makes an impact. And that was the start. And then it kind of went on, because I had fun working in research. Of course, it was bringing money, so I kind of got forward and different loops, and taking the next step. Looking back, it always makes sense. and just being open where you will land, because I'm not a specialist. I would not call myself one, because, I started in the psychological field. I went on injury prevention, went into performance analysis, match analysis, and now I'm there, working in skiing. So you just have to be open about that, where the path will lead you. And then you land somewhere you would, of course, I would have thought 10 years earlier, maybe that would make sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. What a fascinating series of stories. And like you said, it's one of those things when you look back, it all makes sense. But at the beginning, you don't know. But it was also the power of a mentor, that one. I'm sure you would have had a few along your way, but that one person to get you on the path. I think a lot of people listening can relate to that. The first person to get you interested in, let's, in your case, research and stats. In my case, it was somebody just getting me interested in the human body and strength and conditioning in particular. That gets you interested and involved. It's interesting to note. What was your progression into the German Ski Association? So you mentioned now it makes sense because you're a person that grew up in the mountains, and but obviously back 11 years ago, you didn't think that this progression was going to be so, and your background previously was sort of more dedicated towards football. What was your transition into German ski, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so it started about, I think, 4 years ago, and I was at the International Football Institute. We worked a lot with projects. So, you have a certain amount of time, and you have a different topic you're working on with different people. And one of that was with the German Skiing Federation, because I tell everyone before about my boss right now, and he is really interested in other sports. And I think that is something what you could really learn from him is, we always try to do our best in our sports, and especially with the smaller sports. But why should you invent everything by yourself if somebody is already doing things good? And so he was taking a look at a club I was working for at this time, what they did with stats. And so as I'm, I would say, relatively open to other sports. I'm not just with, with football or with certain sports. I'm relatively open. They asked if I could, help them and work with them. And we started, and it was really great because, you have some sports, they're really open to everything what they hear. And I really like that. And it started with a small project, and the project got bigger. And then they were looking for a new athlete monitoring system. And then the project got so big, and I got so emotional about that, because it's kind of like my small baby. I always call it like that. And then I felt like I want to go all in, and it was good after years of having projects, which is great to learn a lot of different people, and the knowledge you gain in this part is really big. But I felt like I want to stay somewhere longer and have the ability to influence a topic for a long time. And when you start different projects, especially from scratch, it's always fun, you're there for working with them for 3 months, and it's still fun. But then, after half a year, you get the issues. And I never got to this point where you really get deep in the work with everybody to be somebody have discussions, not be on the same page. And this is what I wanted to have, and be long-term somewhere.
And so was that role available at German Ski, or did it evolve through your relationship with this coach? And was it open, or did you sort of make it open for you?
Yeah, that is a really exciting question, because I never got a job where somebody had a position before. Yeah. So I cannot really tell how it is if there is a position, or you apply to a certain position. I never got to this point. I always got a position where there never has been one before, which I know is really hard for somebody studying right now and be hey, how should I apply somewhere? Because as I said before, I'm not a specialist. It's really hard to be hey, you're a strength and conditioning coach, you're a performance analyst. I'm kind of like that, but not totally. So it's really hard to maybe it gets out of this podcast a little bit. I've done so many things, but I'm not a specialist. So it was always hard for me when I wanted to have, like a new job and apply to something. I'm like, I'm kind of this person, but not totally. And I never got a job where there was like somebody before. It was always just interest, motivation, talking to the people, and they made the jobs for me. Which I know I'm really sorry about everybody hearing that, because that's like the worst thing you could hear. Be like, oh yeah, they just offered you a job which has not been existing before. But I never went into be like, hey, I want to have this specific job title, money. It was always about the interest in a different topic. So no, there has nobody been there before. There was not this job there before. It was just the project, my interest and motivation, and now I'm there.
Did you create the role yourself, or did they create it for you? Like, did they come to you with this idea, or did you convince them that you would be suited there?
So the idea was there to have an athlete monitoring system. We had one before, which was not working. And it was, I kind of built my own necessity, because the project and the athlete monitoring system get so big. They had to, like hire somebody full-time to do that. Okay. So, it's kind of both. It's always that, of course, you have to be motivated, but you always have to give your company the necessity, like they need you. Sometimes it's knowledge, sometimes it's just like work, it's or the time you spend there, but you always have to make them feel like they really need you. And of course, they should really need you. It's not just a feeling, it's just that they need it. And, and then you can make an impact. And what I really like is that I kind of create my own role. It's not that I don't have like a page where this is your responsibilities. It's I do what I think I should do. Of course, you talk a lot and you get some more ideas from somebody else, and of course you get some influence from a boss. Be like, hey, this is a new topic. Think about that. We should include that. But it's not that, hey, you should call this person, you should have a meeting, you should do thinking like that. And I really like that, but I really understand that people are different. I met people who are really struggle with what I do, because I always like to have, we say like a green grass. I don't know if you know this term. It's just like there's nothing built there. And I take what I think and my creativity to build something. But I absolutely understand there are others out there who really struggle with that. They really want to have structure, and this is your task and you have to commit that. But this is not how I like working.
Well, I think people that are watching won't be too upset with you for just having these roles created because it's quite apparent that your unique skill sets, your experience as a pole vaulter, which then drove your interest in sports psychology, coupled with that mentor that you spoke about, who got you interested in research and science, and your experience inside of universities, and more than anything, I think, at least across these last 30 minutes, that struck me is you really seem to care. You really seem to have an interest in sport or in the athletes that you're working with. The way you spoke about how you would go about approaching athletes, it's slightly different to how you approach coaches. It really comes across like you care. So I'm not shocked at all that they've created some roles for you. And I think that would be my takeaways on what I've heard from your journey is that you've been able to build this range of experiences. Yes, you're not a specialist, but that's almost been your superpower. I've got one final question for you. So for someone starting out in the industry, now it's, it looks vastly different than it did 11 years ago. And I would say globally, there's this interest in human performance, whether it be, there's just a lot more. There's a lot more opportunities for somebody getting into the sports science and human performance industry. What would be your advice for them starting out in the industry right now?
Yeah. So I think first overall, be open to everything. So maybe just like a short story. I worked with drug addicts during college, for example. So of course, I never did anything else in this area, but even this little task, and you had to do that for a seminar, that even helped me right now. And this is something during college. Never think like, oh, I'm not interested in this one, because even if you just take 1% out of this course or class, you can always use that. And I realized even these classes or working with stroke patients, I'm really happy that I work with professional athletes, but just seeing like how you work with different patients, that is influencing my work right now as well. So never think that something is not helping you, because even if you just take 1%, it's beneficial in the past. And just be open to everything, because there was not something in my career right now where I was like, hey, this will be absolutely the next steps. It's just like being open, being interested. And the nice thing is about, as you said before, the industry is rising. It's not as other industries where everything is set up. You're still able to build your own roles. You're still able to get a role which was not existing there before. So I believe just be motivated, be interested, and just go to the people you're interested in, because just, take their seat and think about like sitting there, like, how should I know that out there at the certain university, there is a guy which would be perfect for me? Like, how should I know that? And in worst case, they tell you like that they don't have an open position, or they will not like talk to you. But then of course you at least try that. So never think that the perfect position is just coming at you. And I really hope that you have gotten the feeling that it was like that for me, because of course you're always talking about the nice things, but it's always like, just talk to the people you're interested in. And if you would be the CEO of a certain company, or you're the sporting director of an association or club, like, how should they know you're there? How should you know that you're interested, that you would be willing to give everything you have? They could not know that. So, just give it a shot. Just try, talk to them. And I talked to people I was interesting too. And sometimes they had the time and they took the time, and it was really amazing. And I really like these talks where, like you kind of like your brain is setting up new. And sometimes they were, not nice, but then you realize, okay, this is not the person you wanted to talk to. And, like it was not worth the wait. So just do it, and don't stay there at home and hope that sometimes, the perfect job is coming at you. And I think it was the same for you. It's not like, hey, I'm there and I want to have this position. You're like, hey, I'm interested. Just, start that. And everybody's open when you want to do something.
That's fantastic advice. Kathrin, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
For those that are watching and they want to watch a little bit more, we have our previous episodes up here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, you can subscribe down here. For Kathrin and myself, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching.
Have a good day.